Hello everybody and welcome to a video on the Constructive Criticism YouTube channel. I'm Spencer, host of Constructive Criticism and Limited Time Only, two podcasts about getting better at Magic the Gathering. It's another deck tech, and this week we're talking about a deck similar to the one that just won the GP this weekend, the blue-black control deck. Honestly, I've been losing to this deck a lot on MTGO, and I wanted to kind of talk about my thoughts on the deck and one of the lists that I've seen that I kind of like. There are some things that I would change with this list, but I didn't want to change things before I did a video. This is a little bit different than the deck that won the GP, but it was a similar list that I saw that I kind of liked. So let's talk about it really quick. So let's go over the main deck first. So the first thing that we see is this deck has 6 creatures, kind of a lot for a controller, but there's a reason for the ones that it plays. So it has 1 Kalitas, Traitor of Ghet, 2 the Scarab God, 3 Torrential Gearhulk. Let's talk about these creatures really quick. So the Kalitas is something that I think is in the main deck so that you save sideboard slots. I think that overall you would rather have this in the sideboard, maybe play some more Scarab God. But I think that to open up some sideboard spots for some matchups that could be maybe a little bit difficult for the deck, they decided to move this into the main because I do think that you want as many Scarab Gods as possible, possibly as many as 3. The deck does play those 2 Scarab Gods. I think it's the reason this deck is good. There are many games that I don't think are even winnable for a lot of decks with a Scarab God in play on the other side. Just being able to create a 4/4 every single turn with the ETBs that people have and things like that is really powerful, and the card really takes over the game. It's hard to deal with. It'll just come back to their hand if you kill it. So you have to be applying a lot of pressure in order to kill this thing, because when you kill it, they can just play it again. So you have to have tons of board presence in order to make those plays. It has 3 Torrential Gearhulk. I like that these lists are going down on Torrential Gearhulks. You're not playing as many as 4, really allowing you to diversify your threats a little bit and not be stuck on just the Gearhulk beatdown plan. The main deck has 3 Censors, 3 Disallows, 2 Essence Scatter, 4 Fatal Push, 4 Glimmer of Genius, 4 Grasp of Darkness, 2 Negate, and 4 Supreme Will. There's a few things that I noticed about this list that I really liked. One of them is it wasn't maxing out on Censor like the deck that top 8 the GP. Honestly, I would even play less Censor. I think that the card is kind of overrated, and it's only a little bit playable. Maybe playing 1 or 2 of them in the main. Probably 2. But I can see why you'd want 3. You want to draw a critical mass of them to make them, usable on the earlier turns rather than being a late game card. But I don't love the card. The number of Supreme Wills was also super interesting to me. The reason is because I think that this deck really wants to draw Scarab God, so being able to dig for it or be able to counter something early, also being a great card to flashback with Gearhulk. I think that it's just a versatile card, and it's one of the reasons that this deck is playable. We kind of have talked about that with blue-red control a lot and things like that, but I think Supreme Will is just so flexible that it makes the deck a lot better. If you'll notice something in the main decks of cards we've shown so far, the only cards it loses is Kalitas and Grasp of Darkness. I think that it's very possible that you don't need Grasp for this deck to be good, and you can play other things in these slots to have still have a playable deck, which is pretty powerful. The sorceries in this deck are 2 Flaying Tendrils. I think that this is in the deck because of Kalitas, but the deck from the GP also had 2 of them, so I'm not quite sure. I mean, the card is very good against aggro, and it gives you game against mono red in games that you probably wouldn't have typically. That could also be the reason that the Kalitas is in the main over the Scarab God. I think that this person is clearly trying to give themselves some outs to a very tough matchup in what mono red can be. The land base is 3 Choked Estuary, 4 Fetid Pools, 6 Islands, 4 Sunken Hollow, and 9 Swamps. So we've now only seen 2 more cards that we lose for rotation. Well, I guess 3 if you count Flaying Tendrils. You have Choked Estuary, Sunken Hollow, and Flaying Tendrils. I think all of these are replaceable, and you are getting a replacement land. The blue-black check land is going to be in this set. Drowned Catacombs, I believe. This deck is pretty close to intact going out of this set, which is really powerful. I think that this deck playing 26 lands is super interesting to me. I would think that if you're going to play that few lands, you might want a couple of the cycle draw 2 spell, just to let you have early cyclers as well as a late game draw 2 to really push you over the edge and max out on those things. Really helps you with your Torrential Gearhulks, really helps you with card advantage. So the sideboard, we have 3 Gifted Aetherborn, 1 Kalitas. This is a little bit different than that deck that won that GP, like I was saying. You see that the Kalitas was moved from the sideboard to the main, or maybe maybe this person didn't even see the top 8 list, but there is one less Kalitas here, but it is in the main deck. We have 1 Dispel and 1 Negate. Just completing a counterspell package. This deck has a ton of counterspells in the main. 3 Censors, 3 Disallows, 2 Essence Scatter, 2 Negate, 4 Supreme Will. You don't need too many more counterspells out of the board. We also have 2 Summary Dismissals, though, being counters that can really help you against those big rampy decks with those big flashy spells that you might want to stop. 2 To the Slaughter, this is to help you against Bristling Hydra, obviously, being a really tough card for you. 2 Liliana the Last Hope, this is, first of all, really good in the control areas. You can just jam on the early turns and be set up for success. 1 Never Return and 2 Yahenni's Expertise. Liliana also pretty good against multiple other decks. It can be good against aggro decks. It can be good against mid-range, depending on the setup of the mid-range deck. Yahenni's Expertise, I think, is specifically in the sideboard. I've seen it in a few sideboards, and I think it's for zombies. I think the zombies built correctly and played correctly could become a tough matchup for you. And Yahenni's Expertise really helps you close that out. So overall, I'm really excited about this deck. I think that if you just look at the cards that you lose Liliana, you lose To the Slaughter, you lose Dismissal out of the board, but you don't lose a lot. And I think that, being a Torrential Gearhulk deck that doesn't have to play red, it's kind of cool. It's very different than the red control decks, and it's having a lot more success than the blue-red control decks did. And, it makes me wonder, what's so different about this? What's something that we can learn from this specific archetype? And I think one of the things is just the fact that Scarab God, MVP. The card is so great. It's good in tons and tons of matchups. I was streaming last night, and I was thinking to myself, how could I ever beat this card with one of the decks I was playing, which was Pummeler, and I even lost to this deck on stream. So I think that this deck is quite good. I think that I'm pleasantly surprised every time I play against it. I'm losing to it, so I'm not too pleasant about it. But, I'm happy to learn about decks and be wrong about things. And when Blue-Black Control started making its way through Moto, I thought it was really bad, and I kind of just wrote it off. And it goes to show you that you need to keep an open mind about decks like this, because I think that Scarab God's overall power level in this deck is much higher than it was in the Teamer decks. Being able to just focus on countering creatures, keeping their board presence low, tapping out for Scarab God, and then either forcing them to kill it, or just have you recast it, while keeping their board presence down. It's so hard to get in a position, like I said earlier, where you can force through attacks through the Scarab God, because they're just countering so much stuff and killing so much stuff on the way up to Scarab God. So that's it for this week's deck tech. This is just a quick recap of the deck, kind of less of a all-in. I haven't played the deck. It was a list that I saw that I really liked that I wanted to talk about more than anything, but I've played a lot against this deck, and I think that Scarab God is the key, and I think that this deck could survive rotation, which is another reason I wanted to talk about it. So leave a comment, let me know what your replacement cards would be if you wanted to continue to play this deck post-rotation, and we'll see you guys all next week with another deck tech.